welcome to Captive Minds. I'm Shada Batterson, a writer and author of The Red Letter on Substack. With me is my co-host Max Perry, who's an independent journalist whose work is currently syndicated at Covert Action Magazine. Hi, Max.
Hello, everyone. Good to be with you and back for another episode.
Joining us today is Gloria Guillo, who is CAM's correspondent on location and a former New York City urban planner, public administrator, singer, and songwriter. She's a co-founding member of Green Renaissance Sovereign Rights Movement and a contributor to sanctionskill.org. Thank you. Hi, Gloria. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thanks for inviting me. An important thing is I have a podcast now with Jeremy Kuzmarov, and it's called Left on Left. And the acronym is LOL. Where the left, laughs at itself to keep from crying. And anyway, and Max was on our show on Thursday. So it's really wonderful. I'm used to being now on the other side of the microphone, so to speak, as opposed to talking about my own work. So
Well, we
I
hope
hope
that
your
this is a new
audience will
opportunity.
excuse me.
No, we hope that this is a new opportunity for you, and we're here to hear you speak about your own work. Um, and yeah, you're also a contributor to CAM as well, and we wanted to discuss one of your articles specifically. So I'll let Shayna take it away.
Yeah, you wrote a really great article, which I'll put in the links, about the fossil fuel industry and the green agenda a few years ago, which I'd like to discuss. Your article starts with an important and provocative question, which is, quote, has carbon taxation become an expedient way to redistribute wealth, cover up environmental crimes, promote hazardous energy policies, and control the working class in developing nations? Close quote. I would certainly say it has. You follow this with, quote, does the threat of climate change misdirect the anti-war movement? Could you talk about your involvement in environmental activism and how the movement has changed over the years?
Well, just to give a little background about myself, I've always been very sensitive to environmental issues, but I've never been an environmental activist. And actually, up until I wrote this article, I really didn't have a position on CO2 or global warming or climate change or any of this stuff. And my group, Green Renaissance Sovereign Rights Movement, wanted us to put out an article. And a few of the members compiled some information. And then I was given the task of editing it and making sense out of it. Well, that was a 6-month journey because the group members all had different opinions. And at the time, they all seemed to have a valid point. So I figured I really need to investigate this. And like both of you, that's what we do. We're investigators. We take a narrative and we say, hey, does it make sense? Do the facts add up and come together, or is something really off and doesn't make sense? And I went down that rabbit hole, and it took 6 months. And I spoke to several scientists on both sides, and I found that the scientific information that I got was most compelling from scientists that were kind of older in their careers and not really dependent on grants. And that was very interesting. So it was really like men over 65, really in their 70s and 80s, who could care less about making money at this point or getting a grant or a high level teaching position, that were honest and straightforward. And I found the scientists I interviewed who were, under 50, at kind of the peak of their career in 40s, 45, were extraordinarily defensive and refused to debate the scientists that were elder. I also noticed a real split that the geologists and the earth science people were extremely aggressive when they had to discuss anything important that dealt with this topic, whereas the literally rocket scientists and physicists um, were very open to discussing anything and had no restrictions and were extremely forthcoming. So I found that really curious too. And usually, when you do our type of work, investigations and things like that, we look at why is someone afraid to talk and why is someone forthcoming? And that seemed to be one thing that just really stood out at me from that perspective. So basically, I had this really great scientist, Ted Postal, do a presentation for Green Renaissance Sovereign Rights Movement, and he went through many, many theories. And Ted Postal was one of the people who came out against they were saying that there was a chemical
Yes.
war
Syria.
in Syria. And he was saying that it was impossible from, he investigated the holes that it would have made in the ground if it was a weapon that was actually fired from a plane or something like that, a missile, versus something that was just exploded on the ground to look like something. So he found that whole thing that the white helmets were saying in Syria to be utter garbage. And he's really a very conservative guy. Like when I tried to bring up, Dane Wigington's work, who that we can discuss a little bit, he was like, I don't want to hear it. Dane Wigington is very much in the weaponization of weather. He deals a lot with that, but he also goes into he kind of also believes in the climate change narrative, which is bizarre. So I found Dr. Postal, who is a rocket scientist, literally, and a
Yeah.
physicist,
Yeah.
extremely credible and brave, and didn't hold back on any of his opinions, and everything he said made absolute perfect sense to me. So I started really changing, and then as an investigator, I stood back and I said, well, wait, how come the oil companies have all of a sudden shifted? They were like objecting to this narrative that, there's climate change and global warming and all this stuff. They were just objecting to it left and right. And now the Rockefeller Foundation is completely supporting this narrative. You've got all of these climate initiatives and accords, and I go into a lot of the different things in the article, and what I came up with is this is another shell game. Not I guess double entendre is the Shell Oil Company, but really it's a shell game. It's where they were making profits here, and then if they do this, they'll make profits there, and they just keep moving the shells around so that you don't really see how they're making the money. And what I discovered is that this whole carbon capture thing is silly. I mean, there's not even a way to like say intellectually that this makes any sense. So, I mean, I believe that there's pollution, and I believe that that's a terrible problem. But what the oil industry has done is said, well, the issue is really CO2, which is what we exhale and what the plants need and what creates wonderful agriculture. All of a sudden, they said that that's the problem. And I have to say, as an anti-imperialist, and a skeptic, and I guess a truther, when I hear that the cause of anything is something we exhale as human beings, my lights go up. This has got to be some bullshit. Excuse my language. So right away I was like, this is not making sense. So I went deeper and deeper and deeper, and then I came up with, well, what exactly are they doing with this CO2? Well, it's this whole new market that opened up. So basically, they're taking something out of nothing and giving it a value, and then um, owning this value in a very predatory and a very monopolistic way, and then trading it and making money on it. And the idea, just to break it down into very simplistic terms for your audience, is instead of just having clean energy, which is, using fossil fuels, but having, maybe a higher burn or a filtering system or, some kind of technology that makes it cleaner to use. They won't do that. Instead, they'll put a $1 billion plant next to it. And the $1 billion plant is basically a vacuum. So they'll allow all the toxins to go into the environment, and then they'll suck out, like with a vacuum, the CO2, and then combine it with more CO2 until it's marketable. So it makes absolutely no sense. And, when I say CO2, I'm really talking about the gas. I'm not talking about any particulates that might be released by dirty burning or anything like that, which is, of course, terrible. But just the CO2 in general. And so I thought, wow, so that's the angle. They're using this as a way to get more capital and to do that. And then I started doing more and more research and more and more research, and then I was like, wow, you've got these kids, and they're so riled up about climate change. And I also do want to say a few words about climate change and global warming. First, it was global warming. And when they found out that there really wasn't any global warming on a global scale, I think the temperature's gone up when they really studied it, and all the scientists that are, kind of honorable studied it. It's, I think, less than 1 degree that the temperature has changed. And the other scientists are saying, yeah, the temperature's changed because of the sun and cloud formations and natural things in the environment that actually affect it. I mean, before there was the industrialization, there was warm periods, there were cool periods, there's cycles in life. Okay. But what they've done is just capitalized on some cycles and then, just blew it up. And so going back, so there's hot cycles and cool cycles. So, it's a little bit warmer maybe than it was, but not really. It's like a degree. So you can't rile people up on a degree. Okay. So they had to change it. So they changed it from global warming to climate change. Now, when you have climate change, anything goes. It's like the most nebulous thing. Oh, the cow farted. Climate change. A dog ate my homework. Climate change. No matter what it is, climate change. Oh, we had a rainstorm. Climate change. Oh, we had a drought. Climate change. We had this. Climate change. So, so that's a really nebulous thing, and everything could be attributed to it, and you can't really pin it down. Whereas global warming flopped because it wasn't scary enough. 1 degree does not bring terror to people.
I
And
think
and
I think that the whole terminology of climate change too obscures any concern about pollution, especially from like the military, because it just becomes this obfuscating term. And besides, it's ridiculous because the climate's always changed, even prior to human beings.
right. Now with all that, I'm with you 150% that there is pollution and pollution is terrible. And we should be fighting pollution. But if we fight pollution, then we're fighting the military industrial complex. Then we're fighting corporations. Then we're fighting the owners of the capitalist system. And we're fighting them together in unity. They don't want that. They want us shooting at the wrong target. They want us, shorter showers and don't breathe, literally. And God forbid your cow farts, that's the end of the world. So, so basically they want to control our food supply. They want to control our electricity. They want to control our transportation. So when you look at all of these things, you see that these are all methods of control. So they literally want us to willingly lock ourselves in our homes and twiddle our thumbs because everything else produces CO2. And the, anti-imperialist perspective on this is there's a real division between the global north and the global south. The global north, if you look at a map, is lit up bright as can be, and the global south is pretty dark. But yet, we're telling the global south you can't use energy that's affordable that can help with your development and free your chains of bondage to the to the north. Only the north can run their air conditioning at 70 degrees. You guys can't do it. So that's a bit of a, a struggle too. So then we have another thing that comes up, which I think you brought out is this whole concept of literally kids chaining themselves to paintings and throwing all kinds of things at paintings and making all of these statements. And you have all of this, and they're not focused on the military. So they blow up the pipeline in Russia, the Nord Stream pipelines, and nobody's complaining about the environment. It's like, oh, okay, so you blow up the pipelines. I mean, seriously. All the bombs going off, all of the destruction. Where is, I forgot her name, that tool of the imperialists,
Apparently, she's on Greta Thunberg. She's actually
Greta
on
Thunberg.
the Gaza Freedom Flotilla right now, and a lot of people are pointing out the fact that she's not getting anywhere near the same amount of media attention. Though I remain totally suspicious of her because I mean Cory Morningstar has done a lot of
Yeah,
great work about
love
her.
her.
Um, but yeah, I mean, either way, it's pretty obvious. Like she's not doing any more black and white pictures with Obama, and the amount of it, she's not getting the same heap of media praise and adulation now that she's at least seems to be coming around on Gaza. But like I said, I remain very suspicious. I mean, I just find, regardless of her sincerity, I just found the whole use of very young kids to like support a narrative to be incredibly exploitative and very insincere. I mean, I just the cynicism around that. And I've just found so many people who so gullible about it, like as if they don't use children for propaganda before, as if like the Naira testimony in the Gulf War didn't happen, or like all these other numerous incidents where they do. If you put a kid in front of someone, it instantly makes, they do this to sell war all the time with Syria.
Well,
Um,
they do it with pretty women to sell cars. I mean, advertising is advertising,
mhm,
and it's a bad thing. But with Greta, not a peep, when they blew up the pipeline, not a peep when they're bombing the hell out of Ukraine,
mhm.
or when Ukraine starts bombing Russia, and we're on the precipice of World War III. And every day I'm waking up looking, reading to make sure, who did what. Are we going to have a World War III? Are we going to have a nuclear exchange today or tomorrow? And nobody on the left, which is really terribly frightening, was in my camp. They're like, oh, everything's fine. I'm like, no, it's not. We're on the verge of nuclear war. But they didn't get the memo because
Well,
they're not watching the right stations, I guess.
well, speaking of nuclear war, and you were talking about Ted Postal, the MIT professor, in your article. I actually saw him in person. I went to Scott Ritter's No Nuclear War event in Washington, D.C. In December, and Ted Postal was one of the speakers there, and he gave this absolutely horrifying presentation of what the single detonation or the detonation of a single nuclear warhead over DC might look like. And he even compared it to like the damage that was done by what were much more primitive warheads with Fat Man and Little Boy in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And um, he gave this very frightening slideshow presentation. Um, and I one of the things you're kind of already started to talk about it, but the irony of how so many of the same political forces in the Democratic Party and the fake left who have like in recent years really contributed to this ratcheting up of geopolitical tensions and a new Cold War, a new arms race where all these arms treaties are getting ripped up, and then you have like the Biden administration in its final days sending ATACMS to Ukraine, which is
It was heartbreaking.
yeah. I mean, could you talk about how yeah, like these people in the climate movement have expressed no alarm about
None.
the global nuclear war, the prospect of that, and then at the same time talking about how this apocalyptic narrative about how we only have so many years left until climate is this climate crisis is going to wipe out the ecosystem, and that we only have a certain amount of years to correct it before we've you know crossed the point of no return. Meanwhile, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists is like changing the doomsday clock to less than a minute. Could you talk about that, like
Well,
this
it was really shocking to see that, in real time. One of the fun things I think is in the article is all of the predictions that were made that that it was the end of the world, and I think that was in the article. I'm not sure, but if you
Al
find
Gore?
it and you
Yeah.
want to read it, it's funny. I mean, they've predicted Florida would be underwater. The whole world would basically be underwater. There'd be no more coasts. Oops, it's okay. And this stuff's been going on really, I guess, since the 60s. They've been coming up with these doomsday day things. And they did the same thing with the COVID narrative. They were using these computer models to say, like, basically, if we didn't all get the shots, we'd all be dead and it'd be this incredible amount of death. So we had to be locked down. These computer models are really propaganda. And if you do find those, just read them. They're really funny, the different predictions. So I think something that we also really need to discuss from our shared perspective is this whole thing with propaganda and mind war and this creation of fear and doom and panic, so that if people are in this mindset of fear, doom, and panic, then they kind of isolate themselves. They have psychological breakdowns. They become less effective, and really they're misdirected. And that's something that I'm really talking a lot about with Jeremy on our show. And is how with through controlled opposition and these narratives, how we're all reoriented to things that really are not effective, and how timing is everything. So yes, I agree that what's going on in Palestine is genocide. It was genocide since the 70s. It's been genocide. It's been unbelievable since October 7th. I mean, what has happened? Okay. And one of the things that Jeremy and Fiorella, uh, Isabel, and Jeremy Kuzmarov and I discussed when we had her on as a guest is how all of these student movements that are protesting Palestine or protesting it from a social justice warrior position and not an anti-imperialist position. So it's basically toothless. And just looking at Palestine and ignoring Syria, ignoring Lebanon, ignoring, you could keep naming all the places that are just
Ukraine,
being
definitely.
trained and just oh, I forgot the other one I'm thinking of that we're bombing the hell out of. And
Yemen,
Israel is
Yemen, definitely.
Yemen, and it's just, I mean, what's going on is just incredible. So to isolate it and just say, oh, this is just Palestine, and then doing it really, they really ramped it up after a year. It took them a year to start these protests. After a year, there was a lot of death. I mean, if you really wanted to start these protests and be successful, they should have started in October. But everybody wasn't doing that. And then, what I found with the anti-war movement, we can go into the Green Party when you'd like. What I found with the anti-war movement in particular is that on the left, it's become the members only anti-war movement. It's very exclusive. You can't protest war because you're afraid of the extinction of humanity. You can only protest war if you're the right color, gender, or whatever. And if you have never said anything that might offend anyone, then
Yeah.
you may attend an anti-war protest. So with this exclusivity, it's exactly the kind of what's the word I'm looking for?
Social club.
Excuse me?
The social club.
Yeah, well, it's worse than a social club. It's the siloing of anyone that could work together. And this is a strategy. And this, identity concept and the siloing is how they control opposition, and seeing people fall for it after we bring it to people's attention. And I've brought it to, I've belonged to many of the groups that I criticize, and I've brought these things to the leadership in these groups, and I've been cut out. Instead of them saying, gee, we would be more effective if we broaden the message to all US imperialism in the Middle East or in the world, you know, that would be more effective and would have a wider audience. If we thought of things in terms of not between Muslim and Jew, but between the ruling class in Israel and the ruling class in the United States and the ruling class in, Ukraine and basically every country, and the working class in every country, because that is really the line of division. We are all oppressed. But instead, they like to silo us into oppression Olympics. Oh, into sectional, which kills me also. Okay, it's like, all right, so oppression Olympics. Okay, all right, she's a woman. Okay, she's got some oppression there. Okay, that's good. She's a black woman. Okay, that's even better. Okay, she's a black woman and she's disabled. All right, there you go. And wait. She's really not a woman at all. She's transgender. Okay, the trifecta. Boom, she can go.
Yeah, it's absurd. I did want to ask you about the Green Party. I was going to save it for the end, but since you already kind of brought it up, I'll just bring it up now. I mean, I know I used to vote for the Green Party every election. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't put too much in elections to begin with, but I did used to vote for them. But in 2020 was actually the first time I could not bring myself to vote for Howie Hawkins because of his, or I'm sorry, yeah, I
Because of
mean,
his pro-war stance.
yeah, I mean, it was just unbelievable to me, and I know it was also very disturbing the way the 2016 election, where Jill Stein was scapegoated for just having gone to this RT function in Moscow and was pictured at the same table as Putin. She was implicated in the whole Russiagate thing, and then people within the Green Party, seemingly at least half of them bought into it, and that sort of started to split the party where this narrative was used. I mean, you were on the inside. Like, how did this happen to the Green Party where someone like Hawkins was able to take it
Because
over?
because we have to understand controlled opposition, which we're on the same page with that, and that has to be how we look at everything, because that's how it is. And with the Green Party, basically, it's a it's a pressure valve. When you get upset with the Democratic Party and you don't know what to do with yourself, you go to DSA, Democrats Social, whatever that is, or you go to the Green Party. So there's like a catchment bay for you when you get sick of the Democratic Party. They don't want you actually in a party that could do something. So you go to these two parties and basically you go in saying, "All right, I'm in the Green Party now. I can do stuff." And I did. I went into the Green Party and I said, "Okay, you guys don't have a world peace platform. I'll write you one." I wrote the world peace platform for the Green Party. And I didn't really know what to do with it. And someone said, okay, well, there's a group called GPACs. Join GPACs, give them your World Peace Party, World Peace platform thing, and and they'll try to get it on the National Green Party. I was like, oh, that sounds good. So I joined GPACs and I give them, this document on a silver platter, and they love it and they buy into it. And then they edit it and they make great edits. And, we're a team and everything's really good. So, um, I'd like to be a voting member on the Green Party. So I go back to my New York party and I say, hey, I'd like to be a voting member of GPACs. I've been working with them now for a year. They like me. I like them. We've got things to do. We've got a mission, and it's going well. Can you, you have to kind of recommend someone from the state, and they say no and they refuse and they keep coming up with new things that I need to do so that they will allow me to be a voting member. And it just got more curious and more curious and more curious. So I wasn't a voting member because of the New York. And then in New York, you have Howie Hawkins, Gloria Matera, and a few other people. And I was blocked right away. So, nonetheless, I worked to try to get this adopted by the Green Party, the World Peace Platform, and people from GPACs, this peace committee within the Green Party, worked very hard to get this on the platform committee of the Green Party and adopted. And this is all before the Ukraine, Russia conflict. And they're working very hard to get it, and it was ignored. It wasn't even registered. They refused. And the reason they just ignored it to extinction. And the reason for that is the Green Party does not want world peace. You have Howie Hawkins. And Howie Hawkins' dad is a former CIA agent. I mean, he is so transparent.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. When you go down the history of, and all his positions on every country have been wrong. I mean, he's
Yeah,
if
I mean,
he's
he
not
actually
if
supported sending lethal aid to Ukraine. I mean, I was
yeah.
get-
Yeah. No, the whole thing is dirty. And also, if you had a chance to look at the Green Party in Germany, it was the war party. The Green Party was the war party. So,
yeah,
and then there's something called the Global Greens, again, the war party. They're all about global greens, but nothing about military pollution or anything like that. So it's all smoke and mirrors. These are pressure valves. These are things to keep us from doing anything that is useful. So I tried another route. Okay, if you join an identity group, okay, then you can get into one of these. Committees, because the GPACs was a committee. So if I join an identity group, then that identity group can nominate me to be a member of the committee, which is GPACs. So I joined the Women's Caucus. So now I'm a member of the Women's Caucus, and it comes up, the time for appointments to different committees, and I put in, oh, I would like to be on the GPACs committee. They like me, I like them. Please appoint me. All of a sudden, out of the blue, people start saying that I'm anti-trans, which I'm not. So it was bizarre, but out of the blue, it came out that I was anti-trans, and because I'm anti-trans, I can't represent the Women's Caucus in the Peace Committee, which makes absolutely no sense. So I get really harassed and literally kicked out by men from the Women's Caucus because the Women's Caucus has become not the Women's Caucus, but the Trans Caucus. And women's rights no longer exist. It's men's rights who identify as women. And the truth is, many of these women, okay, they don't even have to do a sex change or be on hormones or do anything. You just wake up one morning with a beer belly and a beard, and you say, I identify as a woman, And you are. You just wake up. That's it. I'm a woman. But it doesn't apply to anything else in life. Okay. I'd like to say, hey, I'm 18. I'd like to go back to school and get a scholarship and study things I never studied. No, 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 you can't do that. I'd like to say I'm, this or that, but no, no, you can't do that. But if you want to take a woman's identity, no problem. Go right ahead. I think that's terrifying.
I think it's good you brought that up. I feel like uh to in regards to what you're saying about the university protesters for Palestine, two issues that have really been just totally swept to the side in the Western left, especially recently, is anti-imperialism. There's really no understanding of how imperialism works at all, and you just get supporting these imperial wars. And then two, any sort of protection of women has been completely erased. But I wanted to ask because you in your article you talked a lot about the unscientific fear mongering around rising CO2 levels. The CO2 fixation has always struck me as rather absurd because without CO2, there isn't any life. And I want to know, do you think there's anything sinister and anti-life in this focus on CO2, particularly because you have people like Bill Gates really focusing on this and other people that have sort of eugenicist
Oh yeah,
ideas?
without question. As I was saying, anytime what we eat and what we breathe is the problem, it ain't good. Oh, we just need less people. And if I saw a lot of this come out of I guess the 70s and the report, the Kissinger report, which basically was like we have to have birth control, we have to have all kinds of stuff, we have too many people. I forgot. I think it was Ted
You're talking
Turner.
about in relation to world
Yeah,
population growth, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, then you have the what are those guide stones in Georgia? They have a number. I forgot what the number is. But also Ted Turner. I saw an interview with him, and he was like, "Oh, now we need to have, I think it was 2 billion people. Well, it happens to be, I think, what, like 8 billion people. So like, I mean, they really want us dead. So I'm not surprised that, what we exhale and the food we eat is not considered the problem. But what they found actually in the report and in the work I've done and in the scientists, what they've said is that we're actually at CO2 starvation levels, that we've have less CO2 now than we've ever had. Again, that's not, particulates and flakes and stuff and toxins. We're not talking about that. We're talking just the pure CO2 gas. So we're actually, at starvation level. So it's actually this is a low in history, and it's not in abundance. So the whole thing's it's just smoke and mirrors, and it's just really, in my opinion, to just divert us from uniting and to divert us from what our real focus should be, which should be on pollution, because that affects us all, and it should be on world peace because that affects us all. And that affects us as a class, it affects us as a nation, it affects us as a world. And they don't want that. And one of the things I'm going to talk about on our show on Thursday, that's coming up, is I've seen this real split between two movements that I'm kind of in both of them. One is the anti-imperialist group, and I'm also in the truther group. And I find it so odd that these two groups are siloed. The truther group seems to be like the Republican group, and the anti-imperialist seems to be the Democrat group. Although neither group is really pure, and it's all controlled opposition even within that sphere. But I mean, there's such crossover between the truther group and the anti-imperialist group that it's shocking that they hate each other, really. I mean, the truther group considers the anti-imperialists communists and socialists, even though they don't know what those words mean, and they think Biden's a communist and a socialist, which he's a corporatist. and a fascist, but certainly not a communist or a socialist. So they don't even understand the language they're using, which is pretty typical. And then you have the, Democrats, the Greens, the liberals, the left, refusing to acknowledge any state crimes. I mean, you try to talk to anyone on the left about 9/11, and
Yeah.
they won't hear of it. If you say it's an inside job or let it happen, you're excommunicated. If you say COVID,
Now they're even like the whole notion of there being like a deep state is stigmatized as like a right-wing conspiracy theory, even though that actually, if you look at the origins of it, it comes from left-wing politics, like in Turkey and stuff. But yeah, any kind of truth, or it's like it's been stigmatized, conspiracy theories. I think that was part of the whole, psychological operation that was done on the liberal left, and now even like the notion of there being a deep state when the CIA historically has been, it's been the left that's always talked about their crimes, and now it's like stigmatized because of this trope that's been, deployed of like the deep state, and it's associated with Trumpism. So it's like to even go there, it's like you're going to be you have to operate with this, fear that you're going to be associated with the political right, which is of course ridiculous.
yeah, I've
I
experienced
did
that
want
on.
to ask you.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you because you were talking about um, how the sort of the purpose behind all these narratives is to take people's focus away from the things that we should be fighting, like pollution and imperialism. And and you also spoke of earlier about these protocols and these agreements that they've passed in relation to climate change, where like I know that the Kyoto Protocol in 1997 granted exemptions to military emissions because the U.S. raised concerns over national security. And then even in the recent, like the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, um, there was reporting of military emissions in it, but they were supposed to be done on a voluntary basis, which of course means that it's basically a moot point. But we know like the carbon footprint of the U.S. military, um, is gargantuan and is probably, surpasses that of entire countries. So even though the U.S. military is probably the world's top polluter, it's seldom talked about these days, especially among the climate change movement. And I guess how has that become such a major blind spot? I mean, of the climate movement, is it because of like the funding of who's behind this and how it's, um, who it's being spearheaded by because it conflicts with their interests?
Well, I think when you have, the industrialists leading the CO2, you know, um, march, and they're the beneficiaries of the CO2 shell game, where, I mean, the whole thing is so absurd. Um, One of the things I put in the first paragraph, I think, of the article was Bill Gates and his desire to cut down trees. Okay. And trees take in carbon, just so our audience knows, they take in CO2 and then they give us oxygen. So trees are very important, folks, but not to Bill Gates. Bill Gates wants to cut down healthy trees and bury them so that they never emit CO2 because everything that dies returns to a CO2.
Well, did you see that they actually like bulldozed parts of the Amazon to be built for, I think it was the COP30 summit in the climate summit in Brazil? I mean, so they're even actually cutting down trees to make way for these ridiculous climate summits with there were these hypocrites come in on their yachts and or
Oh yeah.
on their private jets. I mean, they're even doing it for that. I mean, it's just completely absurd.
Yeah, well, it's all bad. I mean, when you're cutting down trees that produce oxygen, which humans need, clearly this is not about humans. This is about something else. It's about removing humans and controlling whoever is left into these smart cities, which is, something that we're seeing. And yeah, I do believe in weather weaponization, and I've done a show, a couple of shows on that. We went to, what was done in Vietnam with this Operation Popeye,
Yeah,
where they, were controlling the weather. They were
cloud
making,
seeding.
monsoons. And that's just what we know. That's just what's been documented. No one argues about Operation Popeye and the monsoons. Nobody argues about that. Everyone admits that. But there's much more than that. But we had a gentleman from Maui on our show. I'm just his name just slips my mind at the moment. And he was talking very much about the anomalies in Maui and finding people cooked from the inside out. So you'd find a body that's completely cooked with the hair and skin still in place. I mean, that's not a fire. You'd find trees burned from the inside out where they still had green leaves. You'd find a cat, same thing, hair on the cat, teeth, everything, no insides, just burned from the inside out. So these are some high-tech weapons that are being used. And but they turn it around and they say, "Oh, it's climate change." So everyone's upset about climate change, but nobody's upset that these are new secret weapons being deployed. And if you look, you see the fingerprints. You see the bodies with hair, the cats with hair, the trees with green leaves. I mean, there's something wrong here, So, you have that going on too. Um, so I don't know. There's a few things that happen, and then then there's this flooding the zone, which we see a lot of. So you might have a good concept, like Dane Wigington in particular has some very good work, but then he'll jump on the climate change alarmism and ruin the whole thing. So a lot of people, such as Ted Postal, stay away from Dane Wigington, even though he has some good information. It's tainted because he goes down that same, mythical rabbit hole of the CO2 and the alarmism from that. So it's a challenge, and I think with shows like yours and ours on Left, what we can do is just provide alternate narratives and then hope that our audience will be inspired by at least hearing something different and saying, hey, maybe there's something there. It doesn't add up. And what we feel very strongly, and I'm sure you share, is that when people use their creative skills and their analytical skills, it's healing. People become well. It's when people don't use those skills, it's like a muscle, for God's sakes. It's like if you don't use your muscles, you atrophied. And if people do not use critical analysis and they do not see things as, with, different perspectives and then try to find the truth, in it, they're really being harmed. And I don't know if you've seen this too, but I've seen a lot with the vaccinated in particular, how they have become really they go nuts. Their reactions are off the charts. I don't know if you've experienced any of that psychological stuff too going on, but it's pretty
Yeah.
chilling.
I think it's interesting you brought up the Maui fires. I know that I noticed the recent fires in California back in, what was it, January or February, there was a similar thing where the buildings would be destroyed, but all the trees wouldn't be burned. And I saw a video of a former BlackRock employee, I believe, saying that he had thought that BlackRock set the fires so they could buy up all the homes. And I mean, there wasn't a smoking gun or anything, but I think it's it was sounded plausible enough to me. But anyhow, another thing I feel like the climate movement really ignores, which is obviously very purposeful ignoring, is the ruling class's level of consumption. It's every just little person with their modest home and car that's the problem, not someone with five mansions and their super yachts. And
Well, that's the whole thing. That's the whole thing with capitalism in general. I mean, the whole brainwashing of capitalism is that, well, first of all, if you have money, it doesn't matter how you got it, you are successful in capitalism. If you don't have money, it doesn't matter why you don't have it, you're a failure. Okay? And this concept is called the individualization of poverty. So that basically everything that goes right or everything that goes wrong is your fault. So everything that fixes the problem is up to you, but on a very granular, silly level, which goes into the shorter showers. Like we're not going to change the world by shorter showers. I mean, yes, we should conserve water clearly and certainly and it's an important thing to conserve water. It's an important thing to conserve electricity. I'm not, adverse to anything that is mindful and respectful to, our resources. But we're taught that we are the problem, we are the solution on an individual basis. So we're always taught on the individual basis. And this is a brainwashing because what we need is the collective. And when we're collective, then we're like, wait a minute. As Max is saying, what about the military industrial complex? Hey, Greta, what about the military industrial complex? Oh, you're silent on that, huh? How come?
Um,
So,
one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because you've also done some great work on world affairs, particularly I've noticed on Latin American countries like Nicaragua and Venezuela. And I've noticed that speaking of the climate change narrative, that there's been this phenomenon of really of U.S. foreign policy weaponizing climate change to actually target countries for imperialism in the form of green imperialism. Like where, for example, I know you've been to Nicaragua and you've written about that country, and of course the government there, the socialist government there, is targeted for regime change and has been for many years. Um, and I rarely watch mainstream media, but I've seen a lot of mainstream media reports like PBS NewsHour doing these segments where they demonize uh, the Sandinista government um, over like the meat industry in Nicaragua and its impact on the indigenous there. I believe they're the mosquitoes, and where it seems like the U.S. And corporate media is trying to use the grievances of the indigenous, who they clearly could care less about. They're just using it as a wedge, but it's a narrative to like try and portray progressive governments like the Sandinistas as authoritarian and oppressing these poor indigenous people. But specifically, they seem to be weaponizing the climate movement or the climate change narrative in relation to that. And I know that they've done this in Bolivia and some of the other pink tide countries as well. Have you observed that? I mean, I know you're
yeah, well,
familiar with.
the thing is, I just want to be clear. I've never called Nicaragua a socialist country. I'm not sure if they consider themselves a socialist country. I think they consider themselves more humanitarian country. And if you're humanitarian, it seems like what you're doing is socialist because it's social. You're doing things that help people, and they've done a tremendous amount of things. I mean, they're where the rubber hits the road. I mean, they've done, improvements to healthcare, building of roads, hospitals, education. I mean, giving microloans, things like that. So they're really focused on humans and humanitarian development. So, they may be considered socialist because they care about social issues. but it's, an economy that capitalist, you can be a private business owner, you can own your own land, and none of that's discouraged. Taxes are very progressive, things like that. So, you know, that's one of the ways, by labeling something just, socialist or communist, it's one of the ways that you kind of rally the right.
Hmm.
Okay, because the right has this misconception what socialism is. And one of the things I always say all the time is we have socialism and communism in the United States. It's just backwards. Okay. It's rugged capitalism for us and the working class and the impoverished. And it is socialism for corporations. We will bail out any corporation and we will bail out any executive. So it's like reverse socialism and reverse capitalism. So I always want to, make that point because, once you say something is socialist, all of a sudden the right wing goes, they're socialists. They're going to take
Well, and I
away.
bet those same people actually don't know, like, for example, that like in some of the, not just Nicaragua, but some of the other pink tide countries like Venezuela, like for example, there's heavy restrictions on abortion, and I know the Sandinistas have always been a Christian movement, and there's a good fair degree of social conservatism there. So, yeah, I think that is an important distinction to make. I mean, they do have a mixed economy, as you point out in your article in Nicaragua, but it seems like the whole climate, they weaponize.
One of the things I'd like to say is they've been infiltrated. Everybody's infiltrated. No, there's no pure model. Doesn't exist. So, there's windmills in Nicaragua. A whole boatload of windmills. I mean, they bought it. They
Yeah,
bought some of it.
they're one of the most it's ironic because actually if you look at the countries that have technically done the most to address quote unquote climate change, like Nicaragua would be near the top. And
Yeah.
yet so they attack them for the using the grievances of these
Well,
indigenous
yeah.
minorities.
But that goes into the concept of, using the terminology humanitarian and democratic. And, these words are just meaningless. I mean, actually, a show coming up too is going to be, comparing and contrasting some of the countries the United States supports and some of the countries it doesn't. And, what we've come up with, and I think we also talked about that on our show with you, Max, that when the government of a particular country supports its people and is doing the right thing for the country, we call them authoritarian, dictators, strong arms, and then when they are puppets and basically betray their countrymen and their country and their people, then we call them friends of the United States. So, this whole terminology of democracy and humanitarian aid is such crap. And it's just, I mean, really what you have right now is you have Cuba and Nicaragua being considered by the United States government, and it didn't matter if it was Trump or Biden, it doesn't matter. It is the same policy as dangerous to the United States. That the United States has these are threats to the United States. And I've talked about Nicaragua a lot. I mean, you're talking about a country that is geographically about the size of New York State and doesn't have any nuclear weapons, doesn't have anything. Okay, really, it has a military, but it ain't going anywhere. They're not a threat to the United States. The only threat to the United States is the truth that they've got free health care and they've got free education and they've got microloans and they help their people. And when you have, and they actually have a great voting system that I've, been privileged to oversee. I've seen it very intimately, their voting system, and written about it extensively. So, our voting system is a joke. I mean, like their voting system, they have, it's first of all, it's by paper. So it's very hard to, fool around with that if you have chain of custody. We don't have chain of custody in the United States. You can just ballot harvest. In Nicaragua, it's one person, one vote. You have to vote in the area that you are registered to vote in. You have to bring government ID. And then after you vote, your finger is stained with indelible ink, so you can't vote a second time. Your vote is watched and by all the different parties all the way down the line. And I don't remember how many different parties there were, but I think, and I've also watched Brazil professionally and Venezuela professionally and their voting systems. And they all have multiple parties. I think, five parties or so. So you
Imagine
have
that.
you have all of this chain of custody with the opening and this, that, and the other thing. You know, the United States, we we have secretive software. We have proprietary software. Our voting machines are hooked up to the internet. Okay. They have all kinds of back doors. We have no chain of custody, especially with the, ballot harvesting that goes on. And, it's just we used to have exit polls until the exit polls were wrong because they were screwing around with the results. So they had to stop the exit polls. So it's just, these countries are dangerous to the United States as a good example. Because if a poor country, a little struggling country like Nicaragua can can provide for its people in a humanitarian way, legitimately take care of their physical needs and their material needs and their social needs, it's a very, it's a very nice country. You know, you look at the United States and you're like, well, why can't the United States do this? So, it makes us look at our government and say, what about us? So that's what the threat of a good example means. We might want what they got, and we may question why we don't have it. And Venezuela is really the same way. I mean, it's not as I think it's had a lot more problems in some ways, but they have a very good voting system. Also, open source software, not hooked up to the internet, chain of custody, all kinds of protections. And Brazil was the same way, you know. So
Well, I think even Jimmy Carter's election observation organization said that Venezuela had like the most transparent and legit elections in the world at one point.
well, that was until they got infiltrated.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
not in the last
This
few years.
last one, this last one, they were terrible, but the Lawyers Guild was fantastic. The Lawyers Guild stepped up, and they were very critical of Jimmy Carter's former organization, and they were really held Venezuela to a high standard, and Venezuela met it. And Venezuela and Nicaragua and Cuba are not threats to the United States. And one of the things is, like you were saying, with the like the indigenous people. I observed the voting in Bilwi, which is where all the indigenous people are on the not the Pacific coast, on the the eastern coast, which is the Caribbean coast. And so many fantastic changes have happened to this area with development, with access to roads. They built roads. These people now can get to Managua and back. They were isolated. And all kinds of investments in education and healthcare have been made. I mean, the indigenous people are very happy with the Nicaraguan government. Now, are there some people that aren't? Yeah, you could pay people, and which is what happens. I mean, you give people money and and they do stuff for you. I mean, there's a lot of money the CIA hands out through not-for-profits, cutouts, um, organizations like, a lot has been discovered, which is kind of funny with US aid and NED, National Endowment for Democracy. A
Absolutely.
lot of stuff's come out that's real funny, and I don't think the Trump administration realizes, I don't know, they're missing some intellectual buttons. They don't understand that this was done to destroy the countries. Are still like, well, why are they doing it? They didn't like connect the dots.
Yeah, well,
So,
they thought I mean, I think I saw Elon Musk like claiming that USAID was funding the Taliban or something like that. I mean, there was a lot of amazing revelations that came out, but then their like filtering of them was very politically confused, I think.
yeah, I don't think they quite grasp what's been going on. And the reason for that is the right does not have the anti-imperialist knowledge. They're ignorant, which in some cases is maybe a good thing and it's funny. But you know, so they're missing that. I don't know, I'm pretty what do you got for me?
I I think that we can see, especially with a lot of the slashing of social programs, I think we can see going forward how the only thing the US government's going to want to spend money on is tech and defense. And in one of your articles, I can't remember which one, you mentioned Peter Thiel. I was
Oh
wondering if
yeah.
you could talk about him a little bit.
Yeah, I can talk about him a lot. Basically I started writing in 2018 because I was in Nicaragua and I was an expat in Nicaragua and I was on Facebook and I loved Facebook because on Facebook I could find out which restaurant had the best drink special. I could find out which restaurant had, the best sushi or whatever I was looking for. So I liked Facebook. And then, expats, we would trade stuff. I spent a lot of time in San Juan del Sur in Nicaragua. And, I would get a girl showing up in the parking lot to give me sauerkraut. I'd buy sauerkraut from her that she'd make in her house. And it was great because they had this really informal economy that was just wonderful. So someone would be bringing in, honey from their bee farm and some you could buy that and people would be, selling eggs from their chickens and you could buy that. And so you're paying very little for food and you're getting the most amazing quality food because really the food is grown organically, and it's fantastic. I mean, an apple tastes like an apple, a banana tastes like a banana. Everything here, even organic, tastes like a potato. There's like no flavor in our food. It's just terrible. But these developing countries that are poor and don't use all these chemicals, or just have tasty food. So I was very happy and I really love Facebook and all that. And then it was Semana Santa, which is the big holiday around Easter. And I left right before that to go back to the United States. And I'm back in the United States, and all of a sudden, there's this whole revolution that happens. I'm like, what? What? This whole revolution happened? How can this happen? I was just there as everything was fine. And then all the groups that I belonged to, all the expat groups, all of a sudden, overnight, were saying that Daniel Ortega was a dictator, that he was killing students, that everywhere I looked in all my social groups, which were completely innocuous, they were just saying which band was playing, Wednesday night. What was who had Taco Tuesday? I mean, that was what the groups had. Where was the sauerkraut lady? Now, all of a sudden, they're all focused on politics and they're all focused on Daniel Ortega and they're all saying that he's killing students. Now, it just so happens that, while I was there, I was working on a book, which I haven't published. And it was on basically the overthrow of the dictator and Somoza. And I was interviewing people and going all over the country and, really learning a lot about the Iran Contra stuff and what happened and all that stuff. And so, I did have, a knowledge base because I was working on that kind of from a historical perspective. So I was really shocked to see this happen. So I was like, I don't believe this. So I started researching and researching, and I'm like, this is Iran Contra, redo. This is 2.0. This is the same thing. This is all garbage. And the more I researched it and the more I looked at it, the more bullshit it was. And one of the things when you're seeing like a color revolution is that all the media has the same message no matter where you look. So, your social media, one message, your news media, another same message, your print, same message. You're getting this message from all these different sources. So if you think of a human being, we have sight, smell, taste, all of our faculties that we perceive information from. It's that way also with media. So if you read something on Facebook and your friends are saying it, and then you hear something on the radio or you see something on the television, it's like you start believing it, even if you don't believe it. And I have to say, honestly, there were a few seconds where I was like, am I crazy? Is it just me? But none of it adds up. So I got kicked off Facebook by Facebook because I was posting things um, for peace, and that wasn't allowed. The only thing that was allowed was violence against the government. That was the only thing that was allowed. So this is terrorism. So Facebook was promoting terrorism, and I was kicked off Facebook for promoting peace. So I
Yeah.
got furious at this. So I started writing, and I wrote my first article. And then I was like, what do I do with this? And I found a little site in Nicaragua, and they published it. So I was like, okay, I'm done. I got it off my chest. I'm good now. And instead, they wrote me back and said, we need more. And that's how I became a journalist because of, that. So when I investigated Facebook, okay, I saw that it was a replacement for the total awareness software that they were going to be using. And this software was really identical to Facebook, but it didn't have the marketing spin that Facebook had. It just had, give us all your information, we want it. And
Are you
people were
talking
like,
about the NSA surveillance, total information awareness?
yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So they were like, give us all your information. And people were like, wait a minute, this is very Orwellian. I don't think I want to comply with this. So it got defunded. And just so happens, Facebook was right on its heels. And Facebook, same information. You list everything about your life. You can list your medical problems, fine, whatever. It takes every drop of you.
The global
And
spy machine.
excuse me?
It's a global spy machine.
Right. So there came Facebook and it filled that hole. But because of the marketing spin, it became successful. And people, one of the most precious things we have is our privacy. So they found a way to get us to give out our privacy willingly and happily because you can get laid. You can get a boyfriend, a girlfriend. You could be popular with the popular kids. So, it worked and people got really bought into it. So, I saw that and then I was like, well, who invested this? What happened here? How did this happen? They saying that this is a kid who did it in his dorm room. So, I started investigating him and found that he allegedly had a tutor that his father gave him that taught him code. So I said, all right, well, what's this tutor's name? So I found out the name of the tutor and I start trying to research this tutor. This tutor doesn't exist. This tutor is the CIA. This tutor doesn't exist. You try to find the tutor that tutored Mark Zuckerberg in code that his father hired. You just tell me if you can find this dude. Anyone out there, you find this dude, you write to me and you tell me you found him
I,
because I couldn't find him.
I'd like to add that I think of another funny thing about Facebook is Zuckerberg's sort of precursor program that he did for it was Face Smash, which was what he did in college. And he had basically pictures of all the college girls to rate them, like whether you'd date them or smash them. So it had these kind of misogynistic origin story to it too.
No doubt. But so now to get to Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel was the first investor in Facebook. And then there
Oh,
was more investors in Facebook that were also connected to In-Q-Tel. So to really understand Facebook, you have to understand In-Q-Tel, which is the CIA's venture capitalist arm. And if you understand In-Q-Tel, you understand they're kingmakers. They can make anyone wealthy or poor. So, Peter Thiel is very close to In-Q-Tel, and you have Palantir and all of the PayPal mafia and all of that. It's completely the military
eBay.
industrial complex and the technological industrial complex are married, and they always have been. And with In-Q-Tel, it's you can pretty much trace it. So, that's, basically Facebook. And then, there's been a whole bunch of stuff with Facebook where they were doing all kinds of psyops on people, the Cambridge Analytica stuff, where they would condition people. They found, okay, and we know this. People pay attention if something's aggressive and upsets them. So if you want to get people to tune in, it's either sex or violence. And we know this. So, so they did that, and they found that there's something called social contagions. So in the past, it was thought that a social contagion would be like your friend comes over and they're happy and they're really in a good mood, and because you're with them, you become happy because it's your friend and there's this emotional connection and you're getting all happy and stuff. What they found is that there's social contagions through Facebook and through social media where you can actually affect people's emotions. So this is, Mind War 101. And, when I went into the deep on this, it's a military operation, the military reports from the military are how important it is to know, to know your enemy, to know their thoughts, to understand there's chain of command, who are the influencers, who, all of this is visible in Facebook. All of this is visible. So, you can silence people or you can, remove them and, all of these things and just do whatever you want through this medium. So that's, really Peter Thiel. And if you go into Palantir, Palantir's, very aggressive uh, software tracking humans kind of almost there was a movie, I forgot the name of it, where they were doing predictive crime before it even happened.
Minority Report.
Minority Report. Yeah, it Palantir is Minority Report at its worst or best, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, I mean, and I know what you were talking about with those student protests in Nicaragua. I remember at the time there were tons of reports, like in the gray zone, about how it was found that, of course, very predictably, the NED and USAID were intimately involved, and of course, those are cutouts of the intelligence community. And since, I mean, what you were saying about the roots of Facebook, I mean, really social media platforms in general, they know that it comes from uh, grants from the intelligence community, and that the advent of the whole phenomenon is intimately connected with in the and rooted in the intelligence community, and that the databases that these things like Twitter and Facebook, I mean, they actually surpass things like what the NSA surveillance can even keep up with. I mean, it's actually a bigger database than even and yeah, it records every aspect of your life. I mean, it's of
It's
course
very
it's
granular, down to your likes and dislikes. Very granular.
yeah, and it can be weaponized and used for social engineering, and we know for a fact that that they're doing this. And so I think it's kind of amazing the way that you kind of track that whole trajectory, how you took this anecdote of you being in a country where this kind of color revolution is being waged, and then it like you should brought it back to like the whole picture of how it goes back to the roots of something like the platform you were using. It's very roots, and yeah, it can be traced to these oligarchic billionaires like Peter Thiel and I mean it's even like even like someone like Pierre Omidyar, who's the owner of First Look Media. I mean, it was always very bizarre to me, like, all those intelligence community revelations were being put out by The Intercept, which is owned by Pierre Omidyar, and he's one of the founders of eBay with Thiel, I believe. And it's like, who are the biggest backers of NSA surveillance? And so, he's just another. I mean, these people are shaping and manipulating everything on the micro and the macro level. And
When I researched Cambridge Analytica, which was doing mind war on Facebook users,
yeah,
I found that their biggest client was NATO.
interesting. Yeah, I know that they were building profiles of users, right? Wasn't that the whole thing with Cambridge Analytica, and that
No,
Facebook sold
they
them
were
their data?
beyond building profiles. They were doing social engineering. They were changing people's ability for, emotions.
Hmm.
Because, when we go back to everything, the emotions that make us most vulnerable are fear. So if we're full of fear and anger and distrust, we're isolated. We're isolated from our lovers. We're isolated from our family. We're isolated from our extended family. We're isolated from our community. And the COVID narrative was fantastic at that.
Yeah.
I mean, your grandparents could be killed by your children, and people believed it. So,
Well,
to everyone, to our audience, anytime you are driven by anything that makes your humanity the cause of a problem, you're being played.
it's about time to wrap up. But yes, I agree. Fear is a huge weapon. And just my final thing is that this book discusses a little bit of what we were talking about in regards to Facebook and the internet. But thank you so much, Gloria, for coming on. It was great to talk to you.
Thank
And
Yeah,
you.
we'd
Thank
love
you
to
for
have you back.
listening. Thank you for
yes,
inviting me.
and we'll be back next week.